take home before paying income tax will rise every year by whatever's higher out of average earnings, inflation, or 2.5%. This is effectively a tax cut worth £100 a year for pensioners. Now, I want to be really clear that pensioners have paid in their whole lives. They worked hard, many are still living in poverty. But pensioner poverty has halved over the last 25 years. Child poverty, in contrast, is at record levels. So what's going on? Here's another stat for you. At the 2019 election, turnout for people aged 18 to 24 was just 47%. They were the least likely to vote. The most likely to vote? The over 65s. Also, most likely to vote Conservative. And actually, if you drill down into the data even further, the swing vote between the Conservatives and Labour in marginal constituencies are elderly people who didn't go to university. They want increases to their pension. They want controls on immigration. They also want a Brexit. So in other words, their concerns really mirror the issues that the Conservatives have spent a lot of time talking about. Is it fair? Well, you'll have your own view. Is it political? Well, this is an election campaign. What do you think? And you can really tell a lot at where the parties have been. So this is what we're going to do regularly on the show. We're having a look at where they've been around the country. Rishi Sunak kicking off the day in Stoke-on-Trent, which is there, delivering a campaign speech at a pottery manufacturer, very famous in Stoke, of course, and then he travelled to a bowling club, that age thing again, in Market Bosworth in Leicestershire. His Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, also out and about for the party in Bury. So this is really kind of swing constituency central here. Now, meanwhile, the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, gave Labour's pitch to business at a Rolls-Royce factory in Derby. There you go, before a visit to Airbus in Stevenage, so another swing constituency there, just ahead of London. Now, Ed Davey and the Lib Dems were in Windermere. We saw that picture of him, didn't we, in the Lake District, so classic Lib Dem territory there, campaigning from that paddleboard, I'm told. And the SNP's John Swinney, well, they continued their campaign in Edinburgh. Nigel Farage was also out speaking for Reform UK in Dover, which is there. And then this evening, the party's leader, Richard Tice, also had a rally in Barnsley. Our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, has been following it all today. He's got tonight's top story.
Firing up the engines of growth. Labour say that's its biggest mission. And she's here to persuade you that she has the right answers.
Today, I want to put forward a simple proposition, that this changed Labour Party is today the natural party of British business.
Labour wants to sell itself as the risk-free option for businesses and voters alike.
Our plans for growth are built on partnership with business. The government that will build all its plans for the future on the bedrock of economic stability.
That caution means no rushed decisions. A summer budget is off the cards if Labour wins, so they can properly crunch the numbers. The party is proudly waving a letter showing 120 businesses back them, but big names conspicuously absent.
Shadow Chancellor, you're brandishing today the letter from 120 business figures. Several of those are no longer in top jobs. There isn't anyone from the FTSE 100 on it. You will have tried to secure the backing of those people. Why do you think that is?
Well, I'm really proud of the backing in that letter from 120 business leaders today, from businesses big, medium and small, across a whole range of British industries.
Sky News revealed some signatories are listed as working for companies which are currently dormant. Businesses, like voters, want to know what would happen to taxes in a Labour government. The answer not as clear as they might like.
You said that there will be no additional tax rises needed. How long is that blanket promise not to do tax rises beyond what you've already set out going to last for?
Well, I'm not going to write a budget here, but we've been really clear.
Hang on, were you not right? You said...
Sam, there is nothing in our plans that require any further increases in taxes. I have confidence in that. Voters can have confidence.
But everybody's expecting you to get into power if you win the election, declare that there's a much bigger black hole than you're expected because of the Tory mess, and then suddenly you will have plans to put up other taxes other than the ones that you've specifically ruled out. Can you rule out anything around VAT? Are there other tax rises that you think might have to run. Your plans
No, there
might
are
change.
no further increases in tax that we are planning or that we need to fill any black holes.
So are you ruling that out for the whole Parliament?
Well, we've already ruled out increases in income tax, national insurance and corporation tax. That's further...
But not the others. That's the point. You sound like you're not going to raise... You're not going... So there could be raises in other taxes other than those three.
I'm not going to write a budget here.
No tax rises planned, but the Shadow Chancellor giving herself wiggle room if the sums don't add up. Relief for another figurehead of Labour's campaign today. Angela Rayner cleared of any criminal wrongdoing over claims she avoided tax over the sale of her home. The issue had dogged the deputy leader for months. She said she would resign if found guilty. Today, she welcomed the decision and called the Tory complaint to police desperate. This man needs to knock his opponent off course. The Prime Minister precision targeting his party's traditional voters. Labour have claimed he's putting pensions at risk with unfunded promises. Now, a Tory tax break for pensioners, a £2.4 billion appeal to the voters his party relies on most.
Today's announcement of the new Triple Lock Plus, an increase in the personal allowance for pensioners, millions of pensioners getting a tax cut as well. That shows that our plan is working, and if we stick with that plan, the bold action that I'm prepared to take, like today's announcement for pensioners, that shows that we can deliver a secure future for everyone across our country.
Labour is taking a safety-first approach to the economy and this campaign, but their opponents are splashing the cash and voters want clear answers. Is stability enough? Sam Coates, Sky News, Derby.
Well, let's get the thoughts now of our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. Good to have you on the programme, Sam. So we saw you there pushing the Shadow Chancellor on what she would do in relation to taxes. What did you make of her answer?
You have to listen really carefully to what she's saying in order to sort of get clues about the difficult things that she might do after an election, but doesn't necessarily want to advertise before the country goes to the polls. They have set out a small number of sort of mini tax rises to fund a small number of promises for public services. But there is just a much bigger question of how you deal with things like big compensation schemes, multi-billion compensation schemes that are going to have to be funded in the next budget. What happens if Thames Water goes bust? How do you deal with councils that are going bust? There is a list inside the Labour Party of all the things that might require a multi-billion pound cheque and a question, where does the money come from? Now, in that interview, I pushed Rachel Reeves about what happens if there's a black hole. And all the Labour Party have done is rule out increasing three taxes: income tax, national insurance and corporation tax. And she would not go any further than that, leaving open the possibility that other things like VAT, which does raise a lot of money for the economy, could be in play if suddenly the Labour Party get in and discover things are worse than they thought all along.
And a quick thought from you as well on the Conservative Party campaign. I mean, Rishi Sunak there at a bowls club, the messaging pretty clear, and tax break for pensioners.
The Tories are trying to consolidate their core vote, centre-right voters. We haven't seen much evidence that it's working, but that was the point of the National Service Plan. That was the point of funneling money towards pensioners. The question is, will it work? They need something to work, and soon, to calm the troops who are nervous.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Sam Coates there, our Deputy Political Editor. Well, let's get a little bit more on Labour's plan, shall we? Because joining us now is the Shadow Transport Secretary, Labour's Louise Hay. Good to have you with us. So Rachel Reeves today saying she wants to lead the most pro-growth Treasury in UK history. Is she the new Liz Truss?
Well, we have a very distinct and different plan for growth than Liz Truss, which obviously didn't grow the economy. It crashed the economy in 2022 and left interest rates and inflation soaring. And people are still bearing the consequence of that through their mortgage rates. Rachel Reeves's plan for growth in the economy and Labour's plan is obviously built on a fundamentally different approach, which means ensuring that more money is put in working people's pockets and we grow the economy from the bottom up and the middle out, in comparison to the Conservatives who think that wealth can trickle down.
I'm just going to come because I don't understand what that means, growing the economy from the bottom up, from the mid. I don't understand what that means. And I just feel like growth is one of those things that everyone wants. It's like everyone wants sausage rolls without calories, right? I would vote for that. That sounds great. But how are you going to get there? I don't understand.
So what we mean when we from the bottom up, we mean from working people, from people who are paid less. We don't think that by cutting tax for the very richest, for example, as Liz Truss attempted to do in 2022.
No, but what is the growth plan? Just be really, really clear. What is the plan for growth? I know it's not Liz Truss. I got that message. What is it?
Okay, great. So so first and foremost, it's an industrial strategy. It's partnering with business and through a national wealth fund, investing in the green industries of the future. So we've set out plans already to invest in greening our ports, for example, for investing in gigafactories so that we support our automotive sector in this country, to reversing the ban on onshore wind and investing in onshore and offshore and in nuclear as well, so that we can deliver good jobs that are highly skilled in the regions, particularly in the country that need it most, and turn our fortunes around. The government hasn't delivered an industrial strategy over the 14 years it's been in government, and it has been plagued by economic instability and chaos. That's why Rachel Reeves has put that as fundamental to our economic strategy, and it's the first of our promises to the country in this general election.
The Conservatives have made a policy promise too today. They want to raise the threshold on which you pay income tax on your pension. Is that a good idea? Is that something Labour would do as well?
Well, look, the reason why pensioners are paying more tax at the moment is because of the way the Conservatives have handled the economy over 14 years, and they've not been able to raise that threshold. We have said repeatedly we want the tax burden on people to be lower. It's at the highest rate since the Second World War at the moment. But we're not going to be making any spending commitments or any tax cuts that we haven't costed or can afford. And we have set out where we plan to raise taxes, including on non-doms and on private school fees. But that is not something that we think we can afford, and it's £2.5 billion that has come out of thin air today, just like with the costs associated with his national service a couple of days ago. And it shows, I think, that Rishi Sunak is prepared to scrap the last vestiges of economic credibility he and his party have.
So just to be clear, this is not something that you think you can commit to now. So the pensioner threshold would be lower under Labour.
No, we can't commit to raising those thresholds. We want the burden to be lower. That's an aspiration, but we're not going to be making any tax cuts or any spending commitments that aren't funded.
OK, there's another story that I'm just wondering if you might be able to clear up for me today. The Times are reporting that Diane Abbott will not be allowed to stand for Labour at the general election. Is that true?
Yeah, I've seen the same story you have, Sophie. As far as I'm aware, the process is still going and no decision has been made. I've certainly not been told otherwise.
So you think that that's not true, that the process is still ongoing, that it is possible that Diane Abbott will be a Labour candidate at the election?
That is certainly my understanding.
I mean, it would be pretty bad, wouldn't it, if, and I know I'm speculating here, I don't know, as you don't either, it'd be pretty bad if you were saying the process was still ongoing when it wasn't.
It certainly would, but that is what I've been told, that no decision has been made.
OK, thank you.
It is an independent process and it's right that it should be.
OK. We've been talking about the economy today, and you've been speaking about the difficult economic picture. What's been the impact of Brexit on the economy?
I think the way that Brexit has been handled has dealt a massive blow to our economy, not least to the economy of Northern Ireland, as we've seen so much instability over there, thanks to the uncertainty around the protocol and now the Windsor framework. Of course, it's damaged the UK economy as a whole by increasing red tape, and we're going to see more impact over the coming year as new biometric security arrangements are going to be put in place at our ports, particularly at Dover and St Pancras. So undeniably, the way it's been handled has hurt us, and that's why we've said we want to build closer and stronger relationships with Europe, for example, with a veterinary agreement and closer ties over certain professional sectors. OK, so you want to have closer ties with the EU. You say that there has been an impact on the economy, and you mentioned the checks in Northern Ireland in particular. You know, the SNP argue that if you're serious about getting growth back in the economy, then you need to look at a customs union or re-entering the single market. Is that something that you'd consider? Well, no, we've said we won't re-enter the customs union or the single market, but there are other ways to achieve much stronger relationships. And like what though? I mean, you mentioned the veterinary agreement. Realistically, you know, is there a solution to the issue in Northern Ireland if you're not prepared to rejoin the customs union or the single market? Well, the veterinary agreement is exactly that solution, and I served as the Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary over the couple of years that the protocol was being undermined and renegotiated by the Conservatives. And a veterinary agreement would have removed that requirement to do what's known as SPS checks across the border that had been by necessity placed in the Irish Sea. If you have that agreement with the European Union that you would uphold standards on food and on environmental issues around products, then those checks don't need to be placed, and there doesn't need to be that border, and it would have maintained the very basic principles of the Good Friday Agreement, and we wouldn't be in the still debating the impact of Brexit on Northern Ireland as we are today.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Louise Hay there speaking to us on the Politics Hub. Right, we've heard from Labour. Let's hear now from the Conservative Party, shall we? We can speak to the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, that is Bim Afellami. Great to have you on the programme, as always. I just want to begin the interview by reading out a few statistics from the House of Commons Library, if I may. Currently, 25% of children are in absolute poverty in the UK. That's 4.3 million children, the highest level of child poverty since records began. 12% of pensioners, 1.4 million people, are also in absolute poverty. That number's around halved over the last 15 years. So why is it that you're prioritising helping pensioners over children and their parents with your latest announcement?
So I don't think it's a question of prioritising pensioners at all. I think it's about a balanced approach. If you looked at the budget or the autumn statement, last year, two last fiscal events, we have cut national insurance by a third. That is overwhelmingly focused on working people. We've raised the national living wage by its highest amount ever. At the same time, it's right that we don't tax the basic state pension for pensioners, and we've increased the triple lock. With the triple lock, we've increased the pensioners' state pension by 8%. I think that's a balanced approach. So both younger working people are getting a better deal and older pensioners. Labour's approach of saying they want a retirement tax so that people on the basic state pension pay taxes on that basic state pension, we think is wrong.
You talk there about the help you've given to working people and to pensioners, but nearly 4 times more children than pensioners are in poverty. Children, what are you doing for them?
Well, we've increased in the budget, we increased benefits for the poorest families, increased benefits which include that help children by much more than working salaries were going up by. We've also fundamentally made sure that our welfare system helps support people into work, which means that families will have...
Why has child poverty gone up so much then under the Conservatives?
Well, look, as you will know, it's a very, very complex picture, and it'd be wrong for me to point to just one thing and say, well, that's the reason. There are many aspects to it. What I do know is what's within the government's power is to work on increasing the take-home pay of working people, predominantly younger, and that's why we've raised the national living wage by its most amount ever, and that's why somebody on average salaries, after the cut in national insurance by a third, is about £900 better off. So, we are making sure that people who are working, who are on low incomes, are getting a better deal.
You talked there about the prioritising people who are working, the things you've done on national insurance. What is the policy on national insurance? Is the policy going into this election to try and reduce, in the long term, national insurance to zero? What is it?
We're very clear that we would like, only when the sort of government finances and public services funding situation allows, we would like to eliminate the double taxation on work, which is what national insurance is. And we can do that, but only when it's appropriate to do so.
Well, that's meaningless, though, isn't it? It's pretty meaningless if you say that you can only do it when it's appropriate to do so.
I don't think values and priorities are meaningless. You talk about priorities and values. It is a clear value of our party that we're committed to helping working people and to make sure that they're not paying double tax on the work that they do. We don't think that's meaningless at all. We think that's very important. But at the same time, for any pensioners listening to this, and indeed working people who want to make sure that they have a secure retirement, we're going to make sure that your basic state pension is not taxed. That's a reasonable thing for a government to ensure. And frankly, I'm probably surprised that Labour wants to impose a retirement tax on people when they're...
Oh, come on. It's not a retirement tax. It's what you've been doing the whole time you've been in power for the last 14 years as well.
No, it's not. Let me explain why it's not. Because it's because of our rise in the state pension due to the triple lock, which, by the way, we introduced, which has helped reduce pensioner poverty. It's because of that rise that now we're having to make sure that the basic state pension isn't taxed, such as the increase. That's the reason.
But she froze the levels, isn't it? That's why I thought you had to do it, because she froze them last time round. I thought the reason that you've got to do it is because you froze income tax levels. That's the reason, isn't it?
It's because the income's gone up by, state pension's gone up by its highest on record. So, but to make the point again, this is not about prioritising older versus younger, and I dislike the framing of that. It's about a partnership between generations, a partnership between working people cutting their taxes, making sure that your average worker's £900 better off, with older retired people who've paid their way, done their bit, and making sure that they are not taxed on their basic state pension. I don't think that's unreasonable.
Now, there is another story that I do want to ask you about. HMRC, Greater Manchester Police and Stockport Council have all said they're not going to take any further action against allegations about the sale of Angela Rayner's former council house. Would you like to take this opportunity to apologise directly to her on behalf of the Conservative Party?
No, I mean, the investigations happened and the correct authorities, not the government, the correct authorities have made their judgment, and, you know, I've got nothing else to add.
Well, you had quite a lot to add before, didn't you?
Well, to be fair to Angela Rayner, she could have put an end to a lot of speculation if she had been very public and honest with what had happened, rather than allowing the whole thing to drag on and then requiring the police and other organisations to investigate. She could have put an end to this much earlier. But look, we are where we are now. They've said that there's no case to answer, as far as I understand. And, you know, we're going to move on.
What, so it's her fault then?
Well, I said that if there's speculation running for a long time, it could have been put to bed if she'd been very public about the allegations that were put to her. She wasn't, fine. It dragged on for a long time, and now the police has made their judgment. I mean, I don't think there's anything else to add.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Bim Afalami there speaking to us from his constituency in Hitchin. Thank you. Well, the day's big election stories are sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We're going to have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us then will be the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleban and the broadcaster and commentator Ali Miraj. Right, tonight our panel comprises Boris Johnson's former Director of Communications during his time in Number 10, now partner at Charles B Strategy, that is Lee Kane, and the journalist and broadcaster Philip Collins, if I can actually get my words out, who also served as Tony Blair's chief speechwriter during his prime ministership. Right, I'm excited about this panel because I feel like you guys are two people who know what it's like to kind of have election-winning sort of forces that you're part of the team of. How do you think this campaign is going so far? Lee, I'll ask you first. What do you think?
Well, I think, you know, one of the things we were talking about off camera was the lack of jeopardy in what is the campaign. I think there's just an overwhelming feeling that it's 24 points in the polls or so. It's going to be a Labour majority, probably quite a stonking one, and everybody's kind of going through the motions. From a Conservative strategy point of view, it seems they've concluded that as well, and it's about minimising losses rather than going for an actual victory, which, given where public sentiment is probably the right strategy.
So the core vote, then, you're talking about?
Yes, we can see, yeah, exactly. And we've seen the policies that have been unveiled in recent days. It's about, you know, really solidifying that base.
As you know, Rachel Reeves said that the Conservative pension plan was a desperate gimmick. And I thought, well, yes, it is, but that's exactly what's required at the moment. When you're in desperate position, you need desperate measures. And the National Service Plan, which it's all very well, I regard it as ludicrous, which I do, but I'm not the target of it. It is targeted at older voters who are tempted by reform. It's the attempt, when you're in a very bad position, to just pull back the defeat a little. So I think that I think you also saw that, the lack of jeopardy that Lee mentions, in Labour's response to the pensions announcement. If this were a tight election, the Labour Party might be a little bit worried by that. You might think you've got something else that makes even more pensioners come over into the Conservative side. That could be a significant moment. Rachel Reeves just dismissed it with a sort of wave of the hand. I think that shows you they're pretty confident that they don't need to respond to things like that. They don't need to jump into the obvious traps that are being set, because they've got that insurance. Now, I mean, who knows? I mean, let's not take it entirely for granted, but it doesn't feel like there's a great deal of rivalry in this competition at the moment.
That's interesting when you say it's Labour's response as well, because I guess they're having an eye on how they might govern if they win the election, as well as getting there in the first place. You know, if you're in number 10 then, Lee, still, what would your advice be now? Is there anything that they can do?
I think, as Philip's right as well, it's probably the right strategy for where they are now. I think the problems were made when Rishi walked through the door. When was that? Sort of 12, 18 months ago, wherever it was now. I think there was a short window at that point to set out a stall that was actually listening to what the public's concerns were and starting to deliver on that. All elections are broadly change or more of the same. You can see from all of the, if you look at focus groups, you're in the data, you can see that the public overwhelmingly want change. In all the core battleground issues, people feel things are worse now than they were in 2019, and certainly worse now than they were in 2010. So you have to, show that you can deliver the sort of change that people want. And instead, it's sort of been very much a sort of status quo campaign, and it's sort of totally at odds at where public sentiment is. So you can only expect things to go the way they have. Yeah, just on that quickly, because I know you've done a lot of kind of focus groups recently. It's interesting that Labour seem to have picked change as their word. Do you think that's a kind of focus group-driven sort of word for them? Oh, undoubtedly. I mean, sort of 18 months ago when we sat in, focus groups again, people were feeling that things weren't working for them. They wanted change, they wanted their lives to improve. We talk about cost of living, we talk about, they look at small boats, they look at the NHS waiting lists and all these things. They think things are worse than they were. Things aren't working for me, we need change.
And Rishi Sunak knows that, because if you remember back to his last conference speech, he made the rather preposterous claim that he was the face of change. You remember, and that didn't last very long, because it's not possible to be the incumbent government and be the change candidate. But he was recognising that the mood for change was really very compelling and trying to be the face of it. Now, that didn't work. So I think he should have gone earlier to a defeat strategy. I think there's two other people who deserve an honourable mention in this impending defeat for the Conservative Party, and they are Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. Because if you look at the numbers, the Conservative Party was drifting down anyway, but it collapsed after that budget. And so Sunak might be sitting there thinking, well, it's not entirely my fault that this dreadful campaign is full of gimmicks, because I wasn't half dealt a terrible hand. I agree with Lee, you have to try and do something about that. It's no good just simply complaining about your inheritance. You have to act. And I think he's acted really poorly since he became Prime Minister. And the upshot of it all is this.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about Liz Truss there. I might kind of play a little game with myself during the next campaign to see if there's any Labour interviews I can get through without them mentioning Liz Truss, because it's every interview, it seems.
Well, that's something else that's in the focus groups, though. People constantly talk about Liz Truss, and they'll have seen that. But
yeah, it's true. Thank you both very much indeed. We'll have more from Lee and Phil throughout the programme. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. Few understand the art of covering elections like Adam Bolton after covering 10 in his time. He's going to be joining us to see how this one is measuring up. Getting your message out can be an expensive business. We'll see just how much each party is spending. Stay with us.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. Alex Crawford joining us now from Ukraine.
Their personal possessions are all scattered around the place.
Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, try and make sense of the big numbers for us.
Things can change incredibly quickly, and that's what they have done.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
I will always remember the atmosphere at the Shanghai protests. It was an electric mix of excitement, fear and defiance, and a sense that history was being made.
We beg you to let Madeleine come home.
A memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
I've seen people who believe and strive for the American dream, even in the face of disaster.
Hello, welcome back. You're watching the Politics Hub on Sky News, the top stories. Greater Manchester Police and Stockport Council say that no further action will be taken against Angela Rayner over her previous tax and living arrangements. On the campaign trail today, the Prime Minister announces plans for an annual rise on pension personal allowances in line with inflation, average earnings or 2.5%, whichever is highest. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves calls the policy another desperate gimmick, but refuses to rule out further tax rises if Labour finds a black hole in the public finances. And Nigel Farage introduces the Reform candidate in Dover in his first appearance on the campaign trail as he warns about illegal immigration. You can stay up to date with all the goings-on in the election campaign and what's happening back here in Westminster any time of the day on our digital politics hub by scanning the QR code at the bottom of your screen. Also on there today, Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron has called the incident which saw Israeli forces carrying out an airstrike on a designated humanitarian zone in Gaza, killing 21 people, very concerning. We've also got your ultimate guide to understanding the election, everything from postal votes to party promises, so explaining everything you need to know about how it all works. And yes, you can see the moment that the Lib Dem leader, Ed Davey, there we go, took a tumble into Lake Windermere to highlight water pollution. And we have more on his confession that at least one of his dips was, you guessed it, completely deliberate. So all that and much more, just scan the QR code on the bottom of your screen. Now, within hours of the election date being announced, the main parties had launched their digital campaigns. You might have seen the glossy videos, the funny takedowns, including one of Keir Starmer as a doll. Well, here is Sky's online campaign correspondent, Tom Cheshire, to explain how the parties are spending their money so far.
This is already shaping up to be the freest spending election ever. The Conservatives are already spending their money trying to stop their voters going to Reform. Have a look at the overall spending pattern. This is on Meta, which owns Instagram and which owns Facebook. You can see Labour came out of the traps really strongly here, and they've stayed ahead of the Conservatives. There's a similar impression you get over on Google's advertising, which owns YouTube. There, Labour outspending the Conservatives 5-1. Now, all this data is provided by Who Targets Me. They track political advertising. We're working with them over the next 6 weeks to understand exactly what's happening digitally. And this is their executive director, Sam Jeffers. Here's what he said about the context of that spending.
You know, looking back, say, at 2019, you'd say that's almost like final week of the campaign spending they're doing already. So I think it's quite a big shift. You know, I think 2019, 2017, things would have started off much more slowly. This time around, it's going really, really fast.
Well, let's dive in a bit closer. This is basically YouTube, and it shows you Labour is flooding the zone here. You're not seeing many Conservative adverts show up. And they're also doing different adverts like this, which are a lot more around local candidates announcing their election. We've seen lots of those, dozens of those, in fact. Not a huge amount of money put behind them, but there are all over the country. So what are the Conservatives doing? Well, they're targeting in a different way. Lots of attack adverts so far. This is taking a Sky News piece, applying it to Labour, and we can see what they're spending money on Meta. So Meta owns Facebook and Instagram. This is all of the adverts the Conservatives have been running. This is the advert I was showing you earlier. You can see if we just scroll down here, we can see who they're going to target. So if we go into the summary details there, and it's being a little slow, but I think we're going to get there. There we go. This is really, really crucial. What this shows is that it's really targeting men, especially men over 45, 55 and 65 plus. That is the demographic they're going for in the early stages of this election. And that's the same across all sorts of ads. If we go and look at other ones over here, we can see summary details of this. Again, a similar sort of pattern if you're getting this real focus on men over 45. That's the sort of average demographic. It's the average demographic of Reform voters. The message is targeted at them too. That suggests some hesitancy around it then. But it's not the only tactic the Conservatives are using. This is a bit different. It's another attack advert, but as you can see, it's more slickly produced. It's depicting Keir Starmer as an action figure who changes his clothes the whole time, and that's being pushed out across platforms. A lot more traditional. It reminds you more of a billboard, trying to go for that sort of moment that defines a campaign, taking that centralised message and putting it out. And I think we'll see a mix of that over the coming elections. Lots of quick little videos on YouTube that gets your candidate out there, along with these big campaigns. They're spending so much money on this. That's going to keep happening over the next few weeks.
There you go, Tom Cheshire here. Right, let's talk to Lee and Phil again, shall we? It's one of my bugbears that every election now we're saying, oh, it's the first digital election. It's definitely not the first digital election. It's almost just become, we're used to it now, right? It's such an important playing field for politics, isn't it, the digital sphere?
Yes, it is, because as you saw in the report, you can target very effectively, much more so than knocking on doors, which is a very ineffective way of targeting your work in a way. Interesting how rapidly Labour have moved. And normally, when you are in control of setting when the election is, you'd think that would give you an advantage. Rishi Sunak seems to have caught his own party by surprise with this quick election. Labour's been ready for quite a long time because they honestly thought it was going to be May, so they were ready. So they're rapidly moving. Whereas the Conservative Party, I mean, maybe it's deliberate, but they look as though they're not ready in all sorts of ways. They don't look ready for this election to me.
Yeah, it does make you wonder if they've changed their minds, if they initially did have it genuinely penciled in the autumn and for whatever reason have brought it forward. Because I think you're right, I agree with you. Lee, digital campaigning, so important, right? You know that.
I think we live in a situation now where the media is more fragmented than ever before, and all of these platforms, whether it's shows like this, whether it's newspapers, and of course whether it's digital, the primary thing is getting your message out and reaching as many people as you can. So it was quite surprising how late, the Tories, but also I think, Labour as well, to come into TikTok. And when you look at the huge audiences you have of, people particularly under 30 that predominantly consume their news from, visual media platforms now pretty much solely. So, it's a very important element of getting the message out. But of course, the core thing is, do you have the right message to reach people with? That's still the priority, having the right message. And then these are just, conduits to your audience.
So it's not enough to win or lose an election then, the campaign tools?
It probably depends on how close it is. I mean, if it's a really close election, then everything matters in a way, doesn't it? And if you can get an extra little bit out of anywhere, then you take it. There's probably nothing that can be done. Labour could probably sit out the election and still win it, because the background features, which are the Liz Truss and quasi-quasi budget and the change in Scotland and then the cost of living crisis, are so big that I'm not sure a few weeks of no matter... Keir Starmer could probably just come on this programme and just sit here and refuse to speak, and he'd probably still be Prime Minister.
Don't try that, Keir. If we do have you on this programme, which I hope you will, then do definitely talk to us. That is. Is the jeopardy about the size of a Conservative loss then? Because it could be, is the thing that's on the table the Conservatives out power for a generation?
I think that probably is what most people are watching for now, just how big would it be, and hence that's the strategy to try and reduce that sort of damage and loss. But I think I've said before, I'm expecting quite a big Labour victory, and I think most of the sort of average MRPs are sort of 100, 150 Tory seats. That's a considerable drop from where we were in 2019, and that's probably the biggest swing we've seen, isn't it? Certainly to Labour. So it's pretty gloomy numbers.
That would be a vast swing. That would be bigger than Attlee, bigger than Wilson, bigger than Blair. That would be an extraordinary, historic move. If the polls are anything like right, we are looking at something really astonishing.
Extraordinary. Although important to say that a lot can change over the campaign, and we are still in the kind of early days, the first chapters of that campaign. Thank you both very much indeed. Great to have you on the programme this evening. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. Now, few understand the art of covering elections like Adam Bolton. After covering 10 in his time, he's going to be joining us to see how this one is measuring up. Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. I do have a little bit of breaking news to bring you now. Earlier on the programme, we were referring to a Times story that Diane Abbott was not going to be allowed to stand as a Labour MP at the next election. And just to say that my understanding now is that Diane Abbott was given back the Labour whip earlier today. So my understanding is that Diane Abbott was given back the Labour whip earlier today. She had, of course, had the Labour whip suspended for comments she made about racism, the racism faced by black people and also by Jewish people as well, in a letter that she'd written to a newspaper. But my understanding is that Diane Abbott was given back the Labour whip earlier today. Now, he really needs no introduction. He's covered 10 general elections. He's also a Sky News legend, who I've worked with for many years as well. Sky's new election commentator, Adam Bolton. I'm also very glad to say that he's going to be dropping in to see us here on the Politics Hub over the course of the election campaign over the next few weeks. And he's going to be with me on Results Day. So that's the day after polling day for our special coverage. Now, before we hear from Adam, though, I just want to take a little look at some of his greatest hits.
Quite a lot of agitation coming from you. You were shaking your head. Every key result first. And of course, we're going to have all sorts of eye candy for Sky News viewers. The Conservatives have lost more than twice as many seats as they have held. There have never been, ever, so many Labour MPs. Their record was in 1945, where they had 393. Well, as you can see, Downing Street behind me is being prepared for the action of the announcement of a new government later on today, until such time as Gordon Brown goes to see the Queen and resigns. He does remain Prime Minister. Well, Sophie, an absolutely sensational result.
Well, there you go. Adam, how do you... first of all, it is worth reflecting, isn't it? An extraordinary career. So talk me through, what was the first general election you covered?
It was 1983, which was Mrs Thatcher getting re-elected after winning the Falklands. And I was thinking, actually, you know, I've covered, I think, 10 general elections. This is my 11th. On top of that, 9 prime ministers. But the interesting thing is only 2 changes of party and government. You know, when Mrs Thatcher and then John Major were defeated by Tony Blair, and then when Gordon Brown was defeated by David Cameron. So I think what makes this election particularly exciting is the possibility, according to the opinion polls, that we're going to get another change in government. Because I do think that, you know, governing politics, there is this thing called the pendulum, that the party in power, you know, in its pomp, what was it, all power corrupts absolutely, they run out of energy. And the party that preceded them, that had been kicked out, having run out of energy, has a period of time in opposition to regenerate. And that's, you know, one of the things which happens in our democratic system.
That's extraordinary, isn't it? Just 2 changes of parties at that election. It really is quite stark when you put it like that. So it must be quite rare then for parties to kind of get kicked out of power and then get back in quickly.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Well, it hasn't been happening here for a very long time. We had what? We had... what was it, 17 or 18 years of Thatcher, then we had, I think it was 12 or 13 years of Blair and Brown, and now we've had 14 years of, well, I won't list all the Prime Ministers, but anyway, 14 years from Cameron to Sunak. Yeah, and I'm really interested in your thoughts as well, because we're going to be talking a lot on, we call it kind of day 2, but it's really, you know, the kind of the new government coming in, the change of power, if that happens. What would you expect to see on that day? Well, it's always very interesting. And actually, you know, for us who have the privilege of getting close to all the parties, it's actually quite emotional, because you see the utter desolation of, if there is a change of government, of the side that's been defeated. You know, I remember John Major coming out very stiff-lipped saying, you know, I'm off to watch the cricket and all that. And then that was followed by those famous pictures of Blair coming down Downing Street, it's a new dawn, is it not? And tremendous, you know, kind of cheering going on. Likewise, of course, in 2010, we had the fantastic drama which is possible, could happen again, of a hung parliament. And at that stage, you know, it led to the formation of the coalition with the Liberal Democrats. So that's when, you know, and it was 5 days actually then before we got a government, and we could have a hung parliament again. So there's always a lot of emotion, and there's always a lot of working out. And then the final thing is how quickly they put in their new team. And, you know, everyone thinks that if Labour were to win the election, there wouldn't be much change. You know, Rachel Reeves would be Chancellor and all the rest of it. But, you know, again, I was reading today that they're currently on the front bench of the Labour Party, 5 more people than there are ministerial jobs. So right from the start, you know, some well-known names are going to be very disappointed.
We were talking earlier with Lee and Phil about the jeopardy in an election campaign, and I think they were both in agreement that they see it would be very difficult, in their views, for the Conservatives to turn things around at this point. What's your sort of take on how much a campaign can make a difference?
Well, someone did remind me that I once said nothing in politics is ever more or less than a 40-60 probability. So I remain open to things can happen. I don't quite go as far as John Curtis and his 99% chance of Labour government. But I just wonder how much difference this campaign is going to make to voting intention. It's clearly going to be very important in terms of formulating what the policies are for the parties, testing the leaders who, you know, another interesting thing about this election is that this is one of those elections where both leaders are not known quantities. You know, neither of them have led their party into a general election before. So people have got to get to know them. All of that, I think, is very important. But at the same time, you know, another extraordinary, exceptional thing about this election is the period of time where the opinion polls and the local elections, which I know you've been reporting at, have told the same story, which is of a very big Labour lead. So will there be some kind of, you know, dramatic pivot during this campaign? Are people even interested and engaged enough and listening enough to really change their minds, or have they simply, you know, are they simply waiting to cast their vote?
It'll be so interesting. I'm really looking forward to having you here in the studio a bit more. There's going to be so much to discuss. Adam, thank you so much. Adam Bolton there, our election commentator. Get used to seeing him on Politics Hub. Still to come on tonight's programme. Are the Liberal Democrats managing to make enough of a splash? See what we did there. We'll have the latest from their campaign trail and just look at that latest stunt.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock, we'll be live in Bournemouth as a manhunt continues into a 4th day for the killer of a woman stabbed on the beach. And we'll bring you the story of 2 brave teenagers who rescued a man from train tracks with seconds to spare. All that and much more to come on the UK Tonight at 8.
Just did a challenge that I called Tower Power, which was an eco-triathlon to get from the Leaning Tower of Pisa to the Eiffel Tower in France, and then to my hometown Blackpool Tower. So I did it for 3 reasons, really. Firstly, in memory of a little boy called Jordan Banks from my hometown of Blackpool, who tragically lost his life just gone 3 years ago when he was struck by lightning, of all things, on a football pitch. We wanted to do something for the Blackpool community because Jordan was such a special little boy in his own right for fundraising and making a difference. We wanted to raise some funds and awareness for the Army Cadet Charitable Trust, an amazing youth organisation and charity that provides incredible opportunities for young people across the nation. And also for me, thirdly, was to learn a bit more about sustainability because by my own admission, I've been a bit of a serial offender of flying around the world to various continents on my adventures. So I just wanted to see how sustainable can we be. I crossed the channel in a boat that was made from bottles, plastic bottles that children across Hampshire had collected for me. It was made from a bit of repurposed wood and it was glued together. I got across and I'm still here, of course, but it was pretty scary at times. I got knocked off my bike in Paris by a truck driver. But yeah, only a few cuts and grazes. I live to tell the tale. So, but it was an amazing adventure, you know, to see the world.
How long did it take you?
It took me 31 days, 2,600-700 kilometres, and it was
harder than you expected.
It was physically harder than I expected. It was on a wooden bike, so all the bike was made out of coppice wood, so sort of willow, birch, and hazelwood. and it was carrying all my kit, so my tent, my food, my rations, and everything. I stayed in my tent and sleeping bag, so I literally carried my bedroom, my kitchen, all on the bike. So it was, yeah, trying to be as sustainable as possible and give more back to the planet than I'm taking from it on an adventure. And I'm not super green or anything like that, as I say, but I just wanted to see how it could be done. The fundraising's been going great. We're just short of £25,000, which is amazing, which will provide lots of opportunities. And we built this incredible memorial wall through Muir Walls up in Blackpool, which is an amazing piece of art at Blackpool Football Club to remember little Jordan. People can sponsor on towerpower2024.com. And of course, as always, big thank you to the amazing sponsors.
Hello, welcome back. Well, if the Lib Dems had yet to make a big splash during this campaign so far, today they definitely did. Their leader, Ed Davey, took a rather dramatic tumble into Lake Windermere from atop a paddleboard. I mistakenly called it a kayak earlier, but no, there we go. On a serious note, though, the party apparently wanted to highlight that Lake Windermere has been the site of sewage dumping during it. There we go, clambering back onto his paddleboard there. And apparently he tumbled up a couple of times as well. Right, let's talk to Lee and Phil here. I mean, look, campaign stunts, it's always something that parties do. What do you make of this one?
Well, if you're the Liberal Democrats, your big worry is you're not going to get any coverage. And so here we are talking about it. So inevitably you do this sort of thing. I just thought, though, that it's a slightly strange way of dramatising the fact that you're saying the water's not safe is by diving into it.
That's a good point, actually. That's a very good point.
If he's ill for the rest of the campaign, maybe that will amplify it quite well.
Hospitalised after falling into Lake Windermere.
But look, you've shown it a few times. We're talking about it. We're talking about the Liberal Democrats. And being salient and in the campaign is, as for any of the smaller parties, that's the task. The first task is to get some coverage. And, to that extent, you can't blame them. It's worked.
What do you reckon?
I mean, Boris used to always say, constantly, Lee, gaffes are good. Make as many gaffes as possible, and then they never know which one to focus on, which, was mixed advice. But I think, they can see that it's probably what the Lib Dems are taking upon this campaign.
The more gaffes, the better. That's incredible.
But I think the difference with Boris was there was almost an authenticity of how he did things. It was, genuinely often a gaffe, and people they sort of took to him the way he just sort of leaned into the gaffe itself and owned it. He wouldn't, I think, have probably taken on this sort of thing.
It's unusual that he's admitted he did it on purpose, isn't it?
Yeah, that's
unconventional.
That's the thing I can't get. Don't admit anything. Just let everyone believe it was a genuine fall. Thank you both very much indeed, Lee and Phil. That is it from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7. We've got a special show from our target town of Grimsby.
this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first.
It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. 4 days on, a manhunt continues in Bournemouth to find the killer of a woman fatally stabbed on the beach. Officers carry out cliffside searches. The second woman remains in hospital tonight, and the motive is unclear. Also, Rishi Sunak promises to protect pensioners from having to pay tax if he is re-elected. We'll speak to those still campaigning for justice for women born in the 1950s, affected by increases to their retirement age. Just seconds to spare.